Hi, I'm Eddie Patton, neurologist in Houston, Texas, and current chair of the Medical Economics Committee of the Texas Neurological Society. I'm excited to bring you this edition of The Business of Neurology. This video series is sponsored by the Texas Neurological Society. The goal is to help members of TNS understand certain business aspects of the practice of neurology. Today we are going to discuss topics related to the corporate practice of medicine. My guest today is a subject matter expert on this topic. Talking with me today is attorney Hal Katz, partner at the Hush Blackwell law firm. Attorney Katz has focused his practice on healthcare for over 30 years. He received his BA from the University of Texas at Austin and JD from the University of Houston Law Center. He has served as chair of the American Bar Association, the Health Law Section, and is board certified in health law. Recognitions include the Austin Monthly Top Austin Attorney Recognition, Chamber USA Recognition, and the Legal 500 United States and Thompson Rutgers Texas Super Lawyer. He is a well-recognized authority on healthcare law and is regularly asked by industry leaders to give lectures on corporate, transactional, and regulatory issues. So let's dive right in on this timely and complex topic. Hal, thank you so much for being here today.
Eddie, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right, Hal. Now, we hear this term, corporate practice of medicine, and understand that this definition legislatively has changed throughout the years, especially now that we have outside funding sources like private equity and venture capital that have come in and started to acquire practices. Also, viewers may not know that in Texas has some very specific rules regarding the corporate practice of medicine. So why don't we start off by you just explaining to us what exactly does it mean when we hear this blanket term, corporate practice of medicine?
It is confusing. It's not a usual term that most people hear. Corporate practice of medicine refers to the laws and regulations that are intended to restrict, limit non-physicians' involvement in the practice of medicine. The policymakers recognize that the best people to make decisions around medicine should be the doctors, and so there should not be any interference in that decision-making process. So corporate practice of medicine is just that. It's preventing the corporations being involved in the practice of medicine. Now, every state differs. As you alluded to, Texas has some of its own specific requirements around the corporate practice of medicine. What we can do in Texas is not what we can do in another state, and vice versa. The corporate practice of medicine is long-standing. It's been around for, again, a very long time. There are a few exceptions to the corporate practice of medicine in Texas and in some other states. In some other states, they don't have a very strict corporate practice of medicine prohibition. In some states, they don't have any corporate practice of medicine prohibition. But again, in Texas, we are limited. A non-physician, be it an individual or a corporation, cannot own a medical practice. There is one exception in Texas generally. It's for the nonprofit health organization. It is a Texas nonprofit corporation that has to meet certain requirements, and if it does, it will apply for certification by the Texas Medical Board. And if the medical board determines that it meets those requirements, it will certify it as an NPHO, nonprofit health organization. If that's the case, that entity can directly employ physicians. We see that model, that structure, often with hospitals. There are some hospitals, hospital districts that have their own hospitals, like Harris County and Parkland in Dallas and El Paso County. There's a few others that are allowed to directly employ doctors, but non-governmental entities that have hospitals cannot directly employ physicians, and so they have to use the NPHO as their primary option if they want to employ the doctors.
So if I'm understanding this right, even though you may go to a large healthcare system and meet with those administrators, think you're working for that, when you look at the fine detail, it is probably another organization that's created underneath that entity that will directly employ you.
Exactly. Rarely are you going to be directly employed by that health system or that academic medical center, for that matter. They will use that NPHO. The corporate structure can be a little bit more complicated even after that. These entities, these NPHOs, can have subsidiary entities, a professional limited liability company. So a physician can say, well, I don't see that my employer is an NPHO and I'm working for the hospital or the medical school. How are they able to do it? So there are some other variations of that model, but usually at the top there is that NPHO entity.
And as healthcare has become more and more complex, especially from an administrative standpoint, most physicians are good at seeing patients and don't know or have a lot of business education. Do you think these laws, as they're written and intended to help to make sure and protect physicians, do you think that they've done a pretty good job of doing that over the years?
I think they have done a pretty good job. I think it was the right structure at the right time. Healthcare has gotten so complicated now that I do think that there needs to be some refinements, some upgrades to that law. Exactly what those should be requires some studying.
Yeah.
But there are, we'll just call them workarounds that are currently being used both in Texas and across the country for non-physicians to practically, for all practical purposes, be owning and operating a medical practice in states that have a strong corporate practice of medicine prohibition.
Okay.
There hasn't been a lot of transparency around those arrangements. Fortunately, I don't think that there has been a tremendous amount of bad outcomes associated with the model to date, but I do think that there's probably room for improvement.
Okay. And I want to introduce another term that a lot of physicians are hearing and they may not know exactly, but that's regarding private equity. And from a business standpoint, private equity is a source of funds. It's just like a venture capital bank and so forth. Private equity certainly private equity groups are involved in everything from real estate to a lot of different commerce, business needs in other industries. Why has healthcare become such an attractive target for these groups, like these large private equity groups that are coming in and acquiring practices and so forth?
Great question. Well, underlying that intro about private equity is they're investors. They want to make money. And they're looking for areas of opportunity. Well, when you look at the healthcare industry, it's ripe with opportunity. We're always going to be spending money on healthcare. It's probably one of the most recession-proof industries around. We've got an aging population that needs more healthcare. We've got increases and improvements in the standard of care. People want to get better standard of care. There are new innovations for conditions that weren't available for. People want to get treated for that issue and get better. And we're going to just continue to see that. And so private equity sees that potential. They also see how fragmented most of the industry is.
Yeah.
Even with the significant number of physicians now in an employment model, the physician industry, especially with respect to a lot of the subspecialties, are very fragmented, small physician practices. So private equity sees a lot of potential to aggregate those physicians into larger organizations, call it one platform, large medical group platform, and create efficiencies, better business infrastructure, economies of scale, better payer contracting abilities, and at some point sell what they built to someone else who believes that there's even more potential upside in the business that they can achieve, or it's to a strategic buyer, a big health system, maybe a big health plan, where that will align nicely with the other businesses that they're running. So I think that's why private equity has really targeted the healthcare industry. Of course, the policymakers, the regulators, the general public are watching this very closely, and there's much more scrutiny around private equity in healthcare today, and we're seeing a little bit of pushback and maybe some headwinds, if you will, for that continued business model.
And you mentioned legislation, and I want to go there next, because there seems to be a renewed interest in, maybe this has gone a bit too far. There was a article I read recently about hospitals being acquired by private equity firms and the quality of care and the care that patients are getting. So there seems to be a renewed interest in legislatively, how do we control this? Can you summarize some of those issues and what we should look out for on both the state and a federal level when it comes to corporate practice of medicine?
Sure. I think one of the big concerns is anti-competitive effects of consolidation, that private equity is consolidating providers in a way that is decreasing access to care. Either making care unavailable because they're not able or willing to contract with payers, or patients can't access them through payer agreements, or they're too expensive. They've been able to raise their rates so high people can't afford the services from them. So the main concern, or one of the main concerns, is the antitrust, market size, market power that is resulting from private equity buying up all these healthcare businesses, as you said, hospitals, physician practices. So the federal government, or the Congress, is looking at that closely through congressional hearings. The Federal Trade Commission has been investigating and trying to assess whether there's too much market power. Are rules necessary? Are notices of mergers necessary so they can determine if they are anti-competitive? There's also concern around fraud and abuse laws. The Congress is worried, and states are worried, that private equity is about incentivizing profits.
Yeah.
Just making more money, even over whether it's medically necessary care. Order these tests, use this particular implant versus that, this imaging service or diagnostic tests over another, because there's the financial interest, there's a reward. And so there's a lot of concern around the fraud and abuse issues. Those are, I would say, the main areas of concern, besides the main one that we started with, which is, are non-physicians interfering with a physician's ability to treat the patient? Are they able to use their independent medical judgment? And that's, at the heart of the corporate practice of medicine.
Absolutely, and we're in interesting times, and I know a number of practices or docs that have been practicing independently for years and decided for this reason or another that the administrative burden of just practicing has become too much. It interferes with their ability to just sit down and take care of patients. So on one hand, that's what you sign up for. Hopefully they have that administrative help and hey, handle the front and back end stuff and that kind of thing. But on the other side, when you do give up that autonomy, there is a certain amount of control you give up as well. And that, I think, is going to be a balance.
For sure, for sure. And I think that concept or those principles are in any employment model, of course.
Mm-hmm.
You can have that same scenario in a large medical group where the either associate physician or the younger partner physician, or maybe just even the partner physician who's not in a leadership position is not happy with what the leaders are telling them to do, schedule-wise, or we've got a new EHR, or here are hours, or you need to use these surgical devices in the operating room, or these implants. So you can have that tension. I don't think private equity is just, all out bad. We had the same issue when hospitals were buying medical groups. I think the main point right now is it's really challenging for physicians to remain independent. As you said, the administrative burdens of running a medical practice make it very, very challenging.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for those physicians that may be looking for a change, may be looking for someone to come in and either acquire the group or take it over, what are some of the pros and cons that they may need to really think about before signing that contract and moving forward?
It's always a trade-off of the pros and the cons, and you have to weigh them, and everybody's in a different situation. What may be pros and cons for one physician is completely different than for another. But generally speaking, the pros are usually some kind of exit payment. You get a purchase price for your practice, so you get paid for what you built. If you've spent 10 or 20 years or more building a practice, you get to monetize what you built. That's a pro. You get to hand over the administrative burden, that whole hassle, to somebody else. You have access to capital to maybe put in place the infrastructure you haven't been able to do on your own. The new EHR, practice management system. Maybe your office space needs a major upgrade. It's still, from the 80s. You want to go paperless. You want to open up a new location. You want to purchase new medical equipment. So you have capital to make that happen. So those are a lot of the pros. You also have potentially a second bite at the apple. When an private equity buyer purchases you, they'll give you often a portion in cash and a portion in stock, rollover stock in the company that you're joining. And that's to make sure you're still incentivized to build the business. You're still needed both as a leader often and as a productive physician. And they want you to be vested in the business. And so that can be worth something when the private equity goes and sells somewhere down the road, anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 years later. So those are the pros. Now the cons, as you said, you give up autonomy. You become an employee in almost every instant, and those are the main cons. There can be a con of a stigma of having sold to private equity that some people, it doesn't feel good to some people. That can be a con. There's a culture that can be different depending on the private equity fund, the platform that you're joining. We are more profit driven. We are more financially driven. That can be a con. But I do think physicians have to take responsibility to educate themselves on what to expect when they sell to private equity. They are selling to a business. Absolutely. It's a healthcare business. And as much as this is taking care of patients, and patients always have to come first, there is a lot of room for improvement in operating as a business, a viable business where where everybody still can make money, including the doctors, but the non-physician investors can too. And they are taking a fair amount of risk when they decide to buy the practice. So those are the pros and cons.
Excellent. As you mentioned, the physician does give up autonomy. And I think that's that gray line that a lot of people are afraid of when we talk about that corporate practice. That day-to-day responsibility to the physician versus the group. And that is where I think a lot of conflict that I've seen in some of these groups that have sold to private equity, where you see some of the conflict. So what are some of the responsibilities that, I understand that if I come in and I buy your practice, and yeah, I'm a investment vehicle, so I want a return on my investment. So I should have some ability to say if we can do something more efficiently or not, but I'm not a physician. Well, I am, but I'm saying if I was to just a independent firm doing that. So tell me a little bit more about how those roles get blurred, or some of the responsibilities. What shouldn't be the responsibility of a firm buying a group versus to that physician that's selling?
Great question. It comes down to what is clinical decision making, and where do we draw the line from clinical decision making and operational issues.
Okay.
And to your point, that's hard to find sometimes. And I think most private equity companies try to put in place physician leaders in a physician management structure that still allow physicians to make those decisions around protocols, policies and procedures, quality assurance, hiring and firing doctors, medical supplies. Those things still have to be, a physician's input is still required on those kinds of decisions. It may not be you, that physician in that practice, or every physician, but there is a medical director or a chief medical officer for the private equity platform management company. The management services organization has that physician leadership management structure. And they are focusing on the physician issues, the practice of medicine issues, and then the practice managers, the back office people, the front office people are all overseen, supervised by the management company. There is usually each office has a lead physician that provides some supervision, but because a part of the model requires efficiency and the ability to scale, there has to be some standardization. They can't have one way of doing things in the Austin office or in the Austin offices, and another way of doing it in the Corpus office and the Houston office, in the Dallas offices. They really have to create some standardization across the offices, from the patient intake forms to the supplies that they're going to order for the different offices, to getting prior authorization for services, to how they stock the products, the in-office pharmacy, and other medical devices that they may use as a part of their practice. If they're an orthopedic practice, we all hear about orthopedic surgeons having their own product, their own surgical devices that they like to use, their instruments, their implants. We hear that there is, in many cases, there's not much difference between the particular instruments. Someone has to make the hard decision that these are the ones that we're going to be buying for the 200 orthopedic surgeons in our private equity platform or in the hospital affiliated physician group, and everybody's not going to be happy. And so a physician will feel like this is a medical decision. I should be able to choose which instruments I use. And there is a physician involved in that decision making, It's also supported by non-physicians. So, I think there is some gray often, and that's where heads really butt. I don't think the private equity management services organization team or even the hospitals, call them the strategic owners, the strategic buyers, want to get involved or in the middle of the practice of medicine, clinical decisions around treating patients. But there is that other area that does create conflict.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you've been practicing healthcare law for over 30 years and have a wealth of knowledge and have seen the evolution of healthcare and how we've gotten to the point where we are today. We're at this point now where most physicians are employed and, like I mentioned earlier, looking for different ways to help them out, especially with the administrative running of the practice, administrative burden. Where do you see healthcare going, or the future of healthcare?
Yeah, goodness. I mean, I have seen it. We started, I guess it was in the 90s when managed care really took off. Managed care and HMOs. And then the 2000s, we had HIPAA and the anti-kickback statute and the Stark Law really come into the picture, putting additional requirements on physicians, significant risks for physicians and how they did business. Then the ACA was passed. Hospitals started acquiring more physician practices. And then, now we're looking at private equity. I think it is too challenging and too expensive for doctors to maintain small practices. So I think we are going to see a continued trend of consolidation. I believe that private equity and strategic buyers are going to continue to dominate the consolidating of physician practices. It would be great to see physicians do that on their own. They become the management services organization. They all join together, not all, but in different markets, that they start creating more market share for themselves and help address the challenges that we were talking about. All the laws that you have to comply with these days require expensive technology. And if you don't invest in the technology, then you're likely not going to be able to comply with the laws, which means you might be subject to fines, penalties, litigation for improper disclosure of information or fraud and abuse arrangements, improper billing. All the payer requirements, from authorization to time to appeal claims, to constantly changing standards of care and being able to buy new equipment, new technology for just the standard of care. I think doctors are going to have to invest wisely in their own practice to be successful. So I think that's going to continue. Few industries get it right the first or second or third time that they try to go through a major change.
Yeah.
So, who knows where we come out on the other side. We've been moving more toward a consolidated model. At some point, something might happen that might break that up, and we go back to a more fragmented physician practice model. I would be surprised. I think that there could be some failures around private equity platforms or some of the strategic buyers.
Okay.
And some breakup of some big groups, maybe for antitrust reasons or other regulatory concerns. Maybe the private equity people don't invest wisely and they go bankrupt, and then the physicians are able to kind of on their own pull together and start their practices up again, not in a private equity platform scenario, but on their own. So I could see that evolve over time. So my prediction is more change, more change to come.
I certainly can understand that, especially because it seems like in healthcare nowadays it's an ever-changing environment.
Definitely.
Well, Attorney Katz, thank you so much for being here with us today. I certainly learned a lot, and I know our viewers took a lot away from what you were saying and leaning on your expertise. I hope that we can have you come back for another edition, because I know we couldn't cover everything today, so hopefully we can get you to come back and join us again.
Man, Eddie, I'd love it. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks
Appreciate
for having
you.
us. And thank you for joining us for this edition of The Business of Neurology. Please tune in for future episodes in this video series.